Welcome to Syndicated Nightmares, where each week we take a deep dive into an episode of Freddy's Nightmares based on the Nightmare on Elm Street film series. This week, hosts Dave and Michelle are joined by actor Dean Denton to talk about Season 2, Episode 5, Memory Overload, directed by Don Weiss and written by Michael Kirschenbaum. It originally aired on October 30th, 1989. The description is Professor Wyndham is a man with a drinking problem, but he has to get over his fears and quickly, as a former student of his is in a lot of trouble and needs his help. Barbara starts getting stressed out when her computer starts talking to her and believes she's going to be in trouble with the cops for tax evasion. That's not really accurate, but unwittingly, she jumps into her computer to stop a certain file from being saved.
Yeah, it really has nothing to do with tax evasion.
No, it doesn't.
So this episode starts off with, basically we are in an adult college night class, an intro to Shakespeare class led by Professor Winton at Springwood University. And there's this... these two women, I don't know, they're probably like in their late 30s, early 40s, something or somewhere around there, are in the back of the class, and they're just, talking about how they really love Shakespeare, and one of the women is talking about how she always falls in love with the English professor, so she's hoping, to actually learn something in this class for it not to happen.
Right. Or she says she always falls in love with science professors, so she's taking an English class so she doesn't fall in love with a professor.
Oh, okay. Okay, right.
Yeah.
So then we move on to this man sitting in front of them in the class, and he's clearly intoxicated. He is just drunk off his ass. He whispers to the woman in front of him, hey, do you want to go? And then it kind of whispers out. So he's propositioning her for sex. And she turns around and smacks him. So he starts talking about Othello. And then he puts her in a headlock or something. And then starts to rip her eyes out of the socket. And she's screaming bloody murder. And it turns out that the guy doing this is actually Professor Winton, the teacher to Intro to Shakespeare, and it was all an act to get the class engaged in theatrical Shakespeare. And the woman it's from the theater department. Yeah.
But they really went all out. There was blood gushing from her eye sockets all over the front of her shirt, and they went for it.
And her eyeballs, he took her eyeballs out, or fake eyeballs.
Yep.
And was showing them to the class. So yeah, there was some major dedication to this little prank. All for Shakespeare.
I mean, he's lucky that the class didn't attack him or... Yeah.
Yeah.
They took it a bit over the top.
Yeah.
But even though that was just an act to get the class's attention, he still comes across as a drunk. The showing up drunk wasn't part of the act.
No, he's just barely a functioning alcoholic, barely.
And the redhead who didn't want to fall in love with him. The redhead has a thing for him anyway, and the blonde is not having it. Doesn't really like him as a professor.
Barbara is the blonde, but I don't remember the redhead's name. They're
Jeannie.
Jeannie, okay. So Barbara and Jeannie are walking down the hallway after class, just basically talking about how much Jeannie loves the English teacher. And they see the professor in the hallway, and it looks like he's about to have a full-blown seizure. He's just in this drunken stupor, swaying back and forth, and he's green practically because he's, I don't know, and has alcohol poisoning. I don't know what his problem is.
Just blabbering about poetry.
And then Freddy comes on for his little PSA about drinking and how you shouldn't do it, but if you don't believe him, we can take what happens to the good old professor, because apparently he's having a time here with his alcohol.
And Freddy says, you don't think booze can kill you? The bottle alone can tear you apart. And he smashes the bottle.
Which is... I thought that was a little dig at how his Molotov cocktail that was thrown in his
Oh,
boiler room.
yeah.
That's what I thought he was getting at.
But we don't really know it's a Molotov cocktail until Freddy's dead, which was a couple years later.
No, because they had it in the pilot for this episode. They had, didn't they?
Oh, in No More Mr. Nice Guy?
Uh-huh.
Oh, then yeah, he should have referenced that.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, that's how I took it. I could be completely wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as we know, it takes me a while to pick up on things.
No, I think in this case you're ahead of the writers.
Okay. Probably be the only time.
Yeah, and then the professor wakes up in his office, or his home office, and a student comes and bangs on his door, and the student comes running in bloody, and his name is Chuck, and it's Kyle Chandler from Friday Night Lights. And Chuck says he's deserted the army, he couldn't take it anymore, and he needs the professor to hide him.
And the professor's like, I can't hide you, this is an accessory to your crime. And Chuck is like, I can't go home, like I have nowhere to go. And Chuck is like, I've been having nightmares about the military police, they're beating me and the general's letting them, please, you have to hide me out. The professor's like, well, why don't you just go home? And Chuck is like, no, but my parents will kill me. Please, let me stay here. And finally the professor's like, fine, you can stay here. And I don't know. We'll just have to deal with your parents later.
Yeah. And Chuck says he's been having nightmares. And then we see a nightmare of him being grabbed by, or trying to run away. And the NPs are in the woods and grab him. And then Chuck's dad is an officer and shows up and tells the military police to beat him.
And one of the military police is played by Dean Denton, who we will talk to later on. So when the professor's like, okay, fine, you can stay, the professor goes into another room and has a picture of the general in his top drawer. And he's like, okay, we're gonna play for the soul of this kid. So apparently the professor knows that this general is just an evil, evil dude.
Yeah, but I wrote in my notes, why does he have a framed 8x10 of him in his drawer?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was like, oh, well, maybe that's when I thought oh, maybe the professor knew him one-on-one because he's been through this several other times with students. Maybe there's an army academy somewhere close by, and all the students who wanted to go into writing but were forced into the academy come to him, and so he's had to battle this general before. That was my initial thought on it.
And then there's a scene where the general shows up at the door, and he's nice and friendly, or Chuck opens the door to his dad being there. And he's nice and friendly, but then he wants to have a drink, and Chuck's like, please don't have a drink. And he has the drink and suddenly turns abusive. And the two military police show up again and grab him, and they're going to shoot him in the knees. Yeah,
because Chuck is like, please don't kill me. And the general's like, death is too good for you. We're just going to shoot you in the kneecap. So they do that, and it turns out Chuck was just dreaming.
So Chuck is having these dreams and feeling awful and spiraling downward. Fast starts feeling good and drinking less. And he's kept one of Chuck's poems, and he's like, poetry is your future, not the military. Yeah, and Chuck misplaces his notebook, and he says I've never misplaced things before, and he looks in the mirror, and I think it's supposed to look like his teeth are getting yellow.
Yeah, and I didn't understand that. I was like, is he turning into Freddy? What's going on here?
Because as the professor stops drinking and his body's feeling better, Chuck is getting the sort of alcoholic wear and tear on his body. But
yeah,
but we
that's
don't.
True.
But we just see that happening to him. I don't think we really see Chuck drinking, right?
No, we never see Chuck drinking, but he's just getting the physical side effects of being a drunk, basically. Yeah.
And the professor goes to class, and he's acting like he weirds out Barbara because he's suddenly acting like a real professor and asking questions of the class like a real professor would.
Yeah. And Barbara's like, "Why are you asking us questions?" And the professor's like, "Because I'm the teacher. That's what I do." So then after class, the professor goes back home and Chuck is in the bathroom. And he comes out and he just looks hungover. Chuck goes off on the professor for basically using him to build up the professor's like physical image. He's like, I'm getting all the side effects of your drinking and you're just using me. But the professor's like, no, I actually just want to take you to London and we can go check out everything Shakespeare. Let's do that.
Right. Or they'll stop in London, but the plan is to end up in Switzerland because he got a position heading an English department there.
And so then Chuck is like, that's never going to happen. And the professor's like, oh yeah, I have plane tickets. We're totally doing this. And so then Chuck is like really excited. He wants to go to London. Chuck is really excited about it. So they're going to London, but then the general and the military police show up outside, and Chuck is looking out the window, and he's like, they're here. And the professor's like, no, it's just the cab. Go hide in the bathroom. I'll take care of it. And it's like, if it's just a cab driver, why would Chuck have to go hide in the bathroom?
I think it's just, Chuck being overly paranoid, except he's not, because then the general comes in.
The general shows up and like starts to smack the professor around. And then Chuck runs out of the bathroom and the general like shoots him, and the professor like is telling Chuck like, please don't die, we're going to London, don't die. And then Chuck just like disappears, like vanishes.
And then the general, somebody refers to the professor as Professor Charles Winton. So it turns out that the professor himself is Chuck. They were the same person. And the general says, so the professor is the one who originally deserted the army. And the general says, when you deserted, it killed me. And then the professor wakes up drunk on the couch, from the opening scene in his apartment. And all of that was a dream. And he's got he looks at the photo of his dad, and it's it's the same picture in that frame, but it's got a signed message to him, which is also kind of weird. Do family members usually don't give signed 8x10s to each other, do they?
No, they definitely don't do that. It would have been better if like they were both in the picture together. But the message that the dad left was like, to Chuck, you're the hero of the family now, something like that. You're the family hero.
Yeah.
So basically, heavily implying that you are going into the army, you are going to follow in my footsteps, and you're going to make everybody proud. But Chuck didn't want that life because he wanted to be a poet and a writer. So he basically broke his dad's heart when he left the army.
Yeah, I became a hero of poetry.
Yeah, that's true. And then the two girls, Jeannie and Barbara, knock on the professor's door. And they are there for a tutoring session. But the professor turns them down, and then he cries over his dead father. And then, like, a few seconds later, there's another knock at the door, and it's Chuck. And it's very, very similar to how it was in the beginning, with Chuck coming over in, like, a panic attack of, I just left the army, you have to help me, you have to hide me. And it turns out that the professor is in this continuous loop of reliving his father's death and the cause of it 10,000 times, or until he dies, according to Freddy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which I liked that. I liked that ending, that it's just this, never-ending loop.
Yeah.
Or, 10,000 times loop.
Yeah, 10,000 times. And it's kind of a similar plot to the one episode in season 1 about the video store owner. How it was just on this continuous loop, but this one was done so much better.
Yeah, this one was way better than that. Because it was more coherent, and I liked the twist. I was not expecting that Chuck and the professor would be the same person.
I didn't think that they were going to be the same person until Chuck got shot, and then I was like, oh, I bet they're the same person. Nothing gets by me. Yeah. I liked the first half of it. I thought it was clever.
Yeah, and then the second half, it has sort of a weird motif to it with the
like a dragnet.
Yes, that's what I was thinking too. It's the computer itself that's giving sort of voiceover narration.
Yeah, the computer's like doing a mocking of the dragnet narration. And it kind of is like playing the same dragnet music, but tweak a little bit because of copyright. Which when I was watching this, I was like, oh, is this why Freddy's Nightmares can't be put on DVD because of copyright issues?
No, but parody falls under fair use, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it does. Yeah. If not, there would never be a fan film.
Right.
So the computer is kind of the giving a play-by-play of what's going on, the voiceover narration, and says that they received an anonymous tip from an F. Kruger, one of their... But they call it an anonymous tip, don't they? How could it be anonymous? F. Kruger.
I didn't catch that, but...
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they said anonymous tip, that we received an anonymous tip from F. Kruger, one of our most useful resources, something like that.
That's really funny. I didn't catch that at all.
And it's Barbara from the class, the blonde woman. She works at a credit rating agency, and Barbara's kind of a bitch. She is not happy at her job, and it shows.
But at least it's called Computer Credit Agency. It's not the Springwood Credit Agency. So
that's true. So there is some creativity going on behind the scenes now.
Yeah. But yeah, Barbara she has a coworker named Millie that works under her, and Barbara's pretty mean to Millie. Millie's like, do you want me to show you how to use this new system? And she's like, no, I don't need to learn it. That's what you're here for.
So I think the whole thing is like this computer calculates your credit rating, and if you're late on a payment, it really screws up your credit rating, and it takes like 3 months for it to be fixed or whatever. So people are coming in left and right, and they're like, the mailman lost the check in the mail. It isn't my fault. And Barbara's like, well, sucks to be you. And then just walks away. Like, she's just, doesn't give a crap
basically like, that's not my problem.
But Millie, on the other hand, like, she really wants to help, and she understands customer service, and she really tries to help people. But Barbara, like, it interferes the one time that Millie tries to help a woman, and it's like, you're not going to bend over backwards for this lady, don't even bother. It really shows you the work dynamic of Barbara should just like find another job. She needs to find happiness, she needs to find something. Millie really wants to help people, so she should be a social worker instead of working at a credit rating agency.
Well, Barbara is all into Shakespeare, so maybe that's why she's taking the class and, trying to move into a I don't know, a more Shakespeare-centric career.
Yeah, maybe.
So then we cut to, like, Freddy's doing, like, a credit infomercial, and he's like, in trouble, call me. I can kill creditors. I can kill bill collectors. So that's his pitch. And then it turns out Barbara has been changing the credit record for her mother in the system, and Millie...
Pretty regular basis.
And Millie confronts her about it, and then there's a little dream sequence where the computer itself arrests her for tampering in the records, and she gets sentenced to 25 years in maximum security.
And she's put into a prison cell with a computer who has taken on that whole, like, top dog prison mentality. You think the outside world is scary, wait till you get a piece of me. Like that whole like, oh man. Barbara's gonna be someone's bitch tonight. That's like definitely
Yeah.
the vibe that was set.
But then she wakes up, and then the narration says that, now here comes the love interest. And it's this man named Joe Boyette who comes into the agency because he needs help with his credit rating. And he recognizes her. She's wearing like a Romeo and Juliet medallion, and they recognize it, and they both love Shakespeare, and there's this instant like love connection.
Yeah. And they he asks her out to dinner, and they go, and the next scene they're like in the restaurant just like heavily making out at their table. And so Barbara goes into work the next day, and she's just a changed woman. She is in love and wants to make everyone's day. So she goes over to the computer, and she improves Joe's credit score, because that's, she thinks that will make him happy, and he makes her happy, so she wants to do that for him. And he calls to invite her to lunch, and when she goes to meet him, he like ends up being 45 minutes late before, or like 45 minutes go by before she realizes that she's been stood up.
Yeah, and she comes home and she's so upset. So apparently the rule is she can add things to someone's credit rating. So the favor she did for him was to add good things to his credit report.
Yeah, that's right.
But you can't take things off. So she put in good things, and he's got a good credit rating. Then he stands her up for lunch, which seemed weird because he's the one who brought up lunch. So
why would he stand her up?
Why would you invite someone to lunch? You're right.
Yeah.
But anyway, she thinks she's been stood up, and she gets so upset that she goes, that she now puts bad things into his credit report. So now his credit rating is terrible.
Like she just totally crashes his credit score. So then Joe shows up at the credit agency and apologizes and says he wasn't able to make it to lunch because his mom ended up going into the hospital, and he apologizes for not calling and for standing her up. And then Barbara's like, oh, I'm like, thank you so much for apologizing. You don't really need to, but by the by, I kind of ruined your credit. Like, so sorry. Let's go out to dinner tonight and talk about it, followed by some Shakespeare. Like, that's yeah, she's going to take him out to dinner for basically like to apologize for ruining his credit, because I don't think he will ever get a credit card again.
Right. Sorry, I destroyed your financial future. Whoops.
Yeah. Oops, but let's go to Outback. Steak's on me.
Right. Yeah. And he's like, I never want to talk to you again. And he walks out. And then I guess after that, she's at the computer, and she hears him in the computer saying, get me out of here. And there's a sequence where she's pulled into the computer, and she's walking around like all the circuit boards. And these cops come to get her. They're like cops inside the computer system that are actually her former customers that we saw at the beginning of this segment. And they try to kill her in the computer. And then she finds Joe, and he's trapped behind glass, and so she tries to delete the glass, but instead deletes him because she didn't learn that program that Millie offered to train her on.
Right.
I just love that Millie shows up like in the where she is inside the computer and was like, I tried to show you that program.
Oh, right.
She's just like, oh, shut up.
Right. So then Barbara wakes up, and she ends up taking Joe out to dinner and apologizes to him. And she tells him, like, well, Joe's like, can you try to fix my credit score? And she's like, I can't delete anything that I put in there. I'll go to prison. Because in order to delete something, you have to use your employee code, and they'll know that it was me. So then Joe is like, well, can't you use somebody else's? And the only other code that she knows is Millie's code. So she's like, yeah, great idea. And goes into work the next day and uses Millie's code to delete everything that she had put in. Because if it's Millie's code, then the security or whoever will come and arrest her. But it turns out Millie broke her leg and is in the hospital and isn't coming into work that day. So Barbara's the only one that was out at work that day when it was deleted.
Yeah. Yeah, that was sort of fun with her freaking out that, she's trying to frame Millie, but Millie's not there.
Yeah, and she's talking to Millie on the phone, and Millie's like, trying to call off work. And Barbara's like, lots of people come to work with a broken leg. You'll be fine.
Right. Yeah, and then the computer tries to get her to come inside. Another sequence inside the computer. She's got to go inside and delete things. So she's running around the inside of the computer, trying to insert a board into Millie's file, which she does, but then she wakes up and like her necklace is stuck in the computer and she's basically wrestling with the computer on the floor of the office. And then she gets arrested.
Before that happened, the company security guard comes in and they ask if Millie is there because they want to look for her for tampering with files.
Oh yeah.
And Barbara's like, oh no, she went to the dentist. She'll be back later. And then that's when Barbara gets the idea of, I'll just go in and delete the files that were tampered with. And as long as I delete those, then there won't be any evidence of what was tampered with because those are gone too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it doesn't quite work out.
No, not at all. So that's when she wakes up and she's wrestling with the computer, and then she gets arrested for tampering with the files, and it turns out that she gets 5 years in the federal prison.
And then Joe walks in with flowers. He walks into the office with flowers, and it turns out he is Millie's brother. And it was all a plan by Millie to get Barbara out of there.
And then, that's how it ends.
And she had Millie had programmed the computer to come on by itself and say things to Barbara.
Oh, yeah, to make her think like...
It was an all elaborate plan.
Yeah, it was actually a pretty good plan. And then, then Freddy comes on and he says, make sure when you hire someone, they are at least as dumb as you are.
Yes.
Like, that actually isn't bad advice.
But Millie would have to know that Barbara would get so upset after being stood up for lunch that she would... that she was that vengeful that she would immediately go in and destroy his credit.
Oh, I totally got that vibe from Barbara, that she would do that. When people are pissed off, especially like women, they will do some messed up things. Wrath is...
Yeah.
I forget that saying, like, there's nothing worse than like...
Oh, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned.
Yeah, that one. Yep. Yeah, she totally fell into that trap. So anyway, how did you like the episode?
I thought it was fun. I'm actually... I'm really liking this season. I thought both parts were pretty strong. I didn't love the dragnet thing. Like when the computer voice kept coming on, I was like, oh, okay. But otherwise, I liked it. What did you think?
I liked it. I like computer stuff. I liked the Dragnet aspect of it because I watched Dragnet when I was a kid, when I was 10 years old or whatever. So I like that little nostalgia piece to it. Yeah, I liked it overall.
Excellent.
Well, I guess now's a good time to bring Dean on. Hi, Dean. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you guys?
All right. Thank you so much for talking with us.
Well, my pleasure. I love talking about movies and acting and anything else. So, yeah, that's great.
We can first just talk about your role in Freddy's Nightmares. We just watched the episode, and you played one of the military police officers.
Yes, I did. It was that was one of the first jobs I had when I got to LA, and the way I got it was before I moved to LA, I was taking acting classes in Dallas. I studied acting for about 6 years there before I moved to LA. And there was the place where I studied, they had a casting director from LA come in one time and give a workshop, and it was Al Honorado. And I did this workshop, and he really liked what I did. And he said, hey, if you ever come out to LA, just, call me or look me up, and I'll put you to work. And so basically I moved out pretty soon after that. Like a couple of weeks later, I moved to LA and called his office, and he said, hey, I've got this role on Freddy's Nightmares. It's kind of a takeoff Freddy Krueger, the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, and you'd be great for this part. And I said, well, great. Yeah, I'm ready. I didn't have to audition for it or anything. He just booked me on it.
Oh, nice.
And nice. So, yeah. And so when I got on the set, I think we had a table read first with all the cast and everything, which was really cool. I got to meet Andrew Prine, who's been in so much stuff. I mean, just his career has just been great. And Kyle Chandler, who I had had several scenes with. Mm-hmm. That was one of his first acting jobs, and we really kind of connected on that set after the table read, and when we started rehearsing, and actually when we shot the next day, we really connected because he had just moved to LA too, about the same time I did, and we were both from the South, and so we had a lot of the same things in common, and it was really great to work with him. And I ended up seeing him several different times after that at just different parties in Hollywood and stuff. And then when I left LA in '98, and we kind of lost touch after that. I'm hoping to work with him again. I almost got to work with him on Friday Night Lights, but I went through several different auditions. The casting director of Friday Night Lights, Beth Sepko in Austin, one of the main casting directors, she knew that I had worked with Kyle before, so she tried to get me in on several of the roles that were on that show that I was right for, but it never worked out. I would get callbacks and meet the producers and directors, and I was either too young or too old or wrong hair color or whatever, so I never got it. But anyway, so hopefully I'll get to see him again someday. He was great to work with. I really, really liked working with him. We did have kind of a bad experience on that set, though. I mean, I love doing it. I love just being on it. I wish that the internet would have been kind of around then, because I could have, I would have known like how much the director had done before. I really didn't know him. I didn't know he was this old Hollywood director. It was Don Weiss, I believe. And I wish I could have studied what all he had done and who he'd worked with, but I didn't really know who he was or anything. But anyway, so the first night we had a fight scene in the woods, and I'm in his dream, reappearing in his dream and trying to beat him up. And anyway, so we had this choreographer there. Am I talking too much?
No, you're fine.
Not at all.
So we had the stunt guy. He was kind of in charge of the choreography of the fight scene and everything, and rehearsal with him. And he said, "Hey, that's great." So we thought what we were going to do when they started shooting would be great, because the stunt guy said it was okay, and so Kyle felt comfortable with it, and I felt good with it. And so when it came down to shit, we didn't have a rehearsal. We just shot it the first time, and the director started yelling at us and said, "Hey, you can't do it like that. You're not yelling loud enough." I mean, he started just really yelling really, really loud. I mean, there was about, I guess, 50 or 60 on crew, and the whole crew just was silent. And it was really awkward. I looked at Kyle, and he looked at me. We didn't know what to do. And this director kind of, I respect him and everything, but the way he was treating us, it just wasn't right. Mm-hmm. And I didn't feel he should be doing that. And I'm a really nice guy. I try to be nice to everybody on set, and I don't, blow up or anything unless I'm really, really pushed. Mm-hmm. And so when he started getting in our face and said, "You can't do it. It's got to be louder. You just can't do it like that." And so I yelled my lines right in his face as loud as I could do it. And he said, "That's what I want right there." So
Wow.
I guess
Nice.
I guess he was just trying to, to get that energy up, and that was his way of doing it. And after that, everything was cool. I think we shot the next day, and he was great to work with, but it was a little awkward that first time. So, but he kind of reminded me of a football coach I had in high school that would do that kind of stuff to people and kind of intimidate them. And so when I got in his face, he just, backed off, and everything was cool after that. And it was a fun shoot. I worked on it for almost a week. And, I part and some of the stuff I think was cut. I did have a couple scenes with Kyle and Andrew Prine, and it's, since that was my first acting job in LA, it was great my dressing room was right by Andrew Prine, and so I could hear him. The walls were real thin, and we kind of shared this common wall, and I could hear him just rehearsing and everything, and it was just kind of neat to see somebody that had done so much, because I knew who he was, but just to see them kind of rehearse in the same way that I did, and so it was kind of neat to see that. And he kind of goes through the same problems that all actors do, as far as memorizing their lines and working through everything. And so it was great and he was great to work with. He was really nice. And it was a really, really good experience. And so I have another story for you too. So after, I guess about a year or two after this, one of the jobs I had in LA, I worked for a catering company. And this catering company that I worked for, I think they went out of business years ago. They were called La Cuisine, and they did like private parties, celebrity homes, and like movie producers and people in the music business. And it would normally be a party of about 20 to 30, 40, 50 people. And so I met so many actors and producers that way. But I was working a party one night, and it was a rap party for Freddy's Nightmares. I think maybe the show had exactly when it was, but it was maybe the show was canceled and they were just having this last party. And I'm not sure how many. Do you know how many seasons?
2 seasons, and they each had 22 episodes each.
Okay, so this was probably the end of the second season, and they had this kind of a goodbye, a rap party for all the executives and some of the main actors. Anyway, one of the producers, when I was serving him a drink at the bar in this house. It was in the Hollywood Hills somewhere. I'm not for sure exactly where, but I told him, I said, "Hey, I worked on your show. I'm an actor, and I worked on your show." And he thought that was so cool. In fact, in the middle of all this, he introduced me to everybody. They were, I mean, they were right in the middle of dinner. And he introduced me, and I thought that was pretty cool. Robert England and came over and talked to me. It was really, really a cool thing that they did. So,
that's awesome.
That's so great.
It was a great experience. And, I want to do more stuff like that. I love horror movies, and I've always loved them, and hopefully I'll be able to do some more. So do you have any other questions for me about that, or?
So were you a fan of the Nightmare on Elm Street series before you were on the show?
Oh yeah, I love that. I mean, yeah, I really loved it, and I was so excited when I booked that role because of it. When he said, excuse me, when Alan, the casting director, when he said, "Hey, this is the takeoff of Nightmare on Elm Street," I was really excited because I was such a fan of that show, and it was just the whole thing. And I've had some experiences on sets where things went wrong or it wasn't the best, but that show was great. It was just really good to work with. Just meeting Kyle and working, with him was great, and it was just a great opportunity. I miss LA a lot sometimes, thinking back, working on some of those sets, the soundstage that we worked on. was close to Warner Brothers. It wasn't on Warner Brothers, but it was close to their lot, and it was just it was a neat set, really neat. Everything first class about it. They treated me really right. And, yeah, it was a great experience.
Do you remember watching it when it aired?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I think when it aired, I was back in Arkansas. I came home and I was with my mom and dad and my brothers and stuff. And yeah, when it aired, I was back home for the weekend. And yeah, I thought, it was just at that point in my career, I just hadn't done a whole lot. And it was to me, that was a huge break for me. I mean, I know it's a really small part looking back on it now, and it's a small part, but at the time, and it led to some other things through that role. I got an agent, and it just led to some other things. It led to some other work, and plus Al made some phone calls to some of the other casting directors in town at the time, and I getting Beverly Hills 90210 and some other jobs after that because of that role. So yeah, it led to some other stuff.
Mm-hmm. So I'd love to ask you about 90210. Like when I saw on IMDb that you were in that, I immediately pulled the DVD off the shelf and found your scene. What was it like working on this? Yeah. With Jason Priestley and Emma Caulfield.
Yeah. They were so nice, and I met Luke very briefly. His dressing room was right by mine, and I just met him briefly, and he seemed like a nice guy. That was really the only time I ever saw him in LA, and but he seemed like a really great guy. Seemed nice. The other actors that I worked with, they were just. It was what was great about that is we were filming we shot that in Encino, and that's where my wife and I lived. We lived 2 blocks from where they shot that. And so, she walked over and watched some of it. It was cool shooting in my neighborhood. I mean, where that scene happened, that's where I jogged day, and so it was cool to see. And some of the neighbors that I knew came out, and they knew who I was because I knew them just from running in the neighborhood. So it was cool. It was a fun shoot. Jason Priestley was great to work with. He was so nice, really nice. Yeah, it was awesome.
And you worked on some other big shows like Dallas and Quantum Leap.
Yes.
What were those experiences like?
Quantum Leap is probably one of my favorite things. It was just, working with Dean Stockwell and Scott Bakula. It was. We were on one of the big sound stages at Universal, and it's funny how I got cast in that. So my agent sent me on this audition at Universal. It was actually somehow I skipped past the first reading, and this was for a callback, even though I hadn't read yet. But so it was a callback with the director and producer, casting director. And so it was in one of the little bungalow buildings behind some of the sound stages at Universal. So I go in there, and I really didn't have a great reading. It was just kind of okay. I had worked on it, I had prepared and everything, but I just didn't feel, I didn't feel good with it, But the director, he said so, and I think he could, hear my accent, my Arkansas accent a little bit coming through. And he said, "So where are you from?" And I said, "Arkansas." And he said, "Oh my gosh, I've got a lot of friends in Little Rock." He said, "I went to the University of Texas, University of Texas. I went to school there back in the '60s." And I said, "Oh my gosh, that was a big rival. My dad played football at OU back in the '60s." And he said, "Well, what was your dad's name?" And I told him, and he knew my dad because they went to college at the same time. And, he went to UT. Well, my dad went to OU, and that was a big rivalry. And he remembered my dad's name from watching all the football and going to all the games and everything. And so I think that's how I got cast in the role. I mean, I walked there and I thought, wow, at least, maybe my dad maybe this will help. And sure enough, I got cast in it the next day. And then when I worked with him on the set, it was Michael Zinberg was the director, and he was so nice, and Dean Stockwell and Scott, they were just incredible. I just worked on it one day. I had a girlfriend at the time that worked at Universal, and she worked for some of the executives that were in charge of that show. So the great about that is I got the dailies from that show when I got in that day. My girlfriend brought them home. We were actually living together in LA, and she worked. She was an assistant for one of the executives there, so she got me the footage. And I really wanted to make sure I did good because I knew her boss, and they were all going to be watching because they had, they could see what we were shooting. They had a live feed that went down to the soundstage, so they were watching while we were shooting. And so I really wanted to make sure I didn't mess up or anything. But yeah, I got home, and because back in those days, or even now, if you're an actor in LA and you're working on a show, and unless you're the star of the show, you just don't have access to the dailies, to the whatever they shoot that day. You just don't have access to it. But she was able to get that, and yeah, it was awesome. I still have it. I think I posted it on Facebook a while back. It's on. If you look at my stuff on Facebook, you can go back to the videos and you can see the dailies of that show. And yeah, Dean is pretty funny. I think he kind of cracks a joke in one of the scenes, and it was awesome. So when I first met him, it was kind of, I guess he misunderstood what I said. The director was introducing us right when I got on the set, and he said, "Hey, this is Dean. Dean, this is Dean." And Dean Stockwell said, "No, I'm Dean." And I said, "No, I'm Dean too." And we went back and forth for a second. He said, "Oh, you mean your name is Dean?" And I said, "Yeah, just like yours." So it was funny.
That's great.
It was cool. That was a great experience, man. I just had so many great experiences from LA, and it was awesome. Mm-hmm. So you guys saw The Highwaymen too, right?
Yes. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest thing I have done. It's taken, for some people, it doesn't take that long to get their break. But for me, it's just taken so long, and I still don't really. I'm not there yet, but I'm getting closer. I did take a 10-year break from about '98 when my wife and I left LA, and yeah, it was in '98. Yeah, for about 8 or 9 years after that, I got out of the business. But about 10 years ago, I got back into it, and I know that that's what I always want to do, and I'm not going to give it up. And my nephew went out there to LA a few years ago. And he was just broke, and he's from the same town that I'm from in Arkansas. Mm-hmm. Before he went, he came over to my house here, and we ran some lines, and I just got to thinking, man, he's really good, and he's never had acting class. And before that, about a year before that, he'd been on a set from a short film that I did here locally. It was just a low budget short film. See me on the set, so. And after that, he told me, "Man, I really want to do that. I love it." And I said, "You just gotta. It's hard to do it in Arkansas. You eventually got to go to New York or LA. LA is probably the best place, and try to get started." And so he went out there, I guess, about 4 years ago, and really struggled for. I mean, he didn't really have a place to stay. He lived on different people's couches, and just really had a tough time. But about a little over a year and a half ago, he booked a really, really good show. And he went from having about 5,000 on Instagram to like 1.6 million in just a few months' time. He plays a character on Riverdale called Chick Cooper, and he's done really well. He's a really good kid. So we kind of talk shop when he comes home and stuff, but yeah, he's doing really good out there. He just was on TV the other night on Riverdale I think they're in their 4th season. yeah, so he's doing good. So I guess that stuff kind of runs in our family a little bit. So,
That's fantastic.
That's great.
man, it was just real. Kevin Costner, the first day, he just really took me under his wing, and I don't really know why. I knew when I got there, I may not be the best actor there, but I was going to work harder than anybody. And I got there early, didn't mind staying late, and I knew my lines and just really tried to work hard. And I think Kevin saw that, and he really took me under his wing. And after that first day, I worked on it for about 5 weeks, 4.5 weeks, almost five. And every day when I had a scene with him or with Woody or any of them, Kevin would always come up and get the director. He would ask John Lee, the director, to come over and say, hey, let's give Dean more to do in this scene. And he did that every day just about. And so he was just really, really good to work with. Woody, I loved to get to know until the end. I loved working with him, but he's just kind of in his own world. And he's a great actor. I mean, incredible. He's so gifted and talented, but it was hard to kind of get to know him until the end. And then he kind of opened up, and he was great. They were both great. I just had a great experience. And John Lee Hancock, the director, was just amazing to work with. And got to meet the writer, John Fusco, the writer who wrote Young Guns 1 and 2. And he's just done some incredible movies. And got to really hang out with him a lot. And it was just a great experience. I miss being on that set. It's probably one of the hardest sets I've ever had to leave. I mean, I just didn't want to leave. I just wanted to stay there. And so it was a wonderful time, really. And it's really, my role was small in that, but it has really helped me get some other things going. I just got an agent in Atlanta that I've been wanting to get with for a while, and they wouldn't take me. They wouldn't return my calls or anything for 2 years, and I sent them a couple of scenes with Woody and Kevin, and they immediately called me a few minutes after that. So and said,
Oh, nice. That's great.
Said they would represent me, so that was good. So yeah, it's helped, and hopefully I'll at some point be able to work with those guys again. Also, Casey Silver, the producer of that show, was just amazing too. He's done some incredible stuff, and got to hang out with him a little bit. And yeah, it was a really good time, and I'm ready to get back on something like that again. So I've got a few things that I've just auditioned for, so I don't know, haven't heard anything yet, but I'm hoping to work on something like that again soon. So I just read for a couple of different Netflix projects, so we'll see. Maybe in the next week or something, I'll know. But, what else do you guys want to know? I'm pretty much an open book. I'll tell you.
Since we're talking about The Highwaymen, I was wondering what it was like shooting the climax of the movie, the shootout with Bonnie and Clyde.
Oh, there was no acting in that thing. It was just because you were just reacting. It was really it felt real to me. The way they, we were shooting 50 feet from the marker of where they were actually killed. And in fact, when we stand up from the bushes and everything, we're getting ready to shoot them. That was about 10 feet or so from where they really shot, or it could have been the exact spot. They don't know exactly, but they felt like we were pretty close. We're about 50 feet from the marker. They have a marker there that, it has all the lawman's name and everything printed. But as far as where we were shooting, it was about, the director, John, thought that we might either be on the spot or maybe a few feet away. And so the way they did it, just the set and all the props and the guns and the car, the whole thing, John just created this atmosphere where I felt like I was really there. In fact, before they would say cut, action, you started to get little butterflies in your stomach, and it was like in a small way, I think I kind of knew what those guys were going through. In a tiny, tiny way. Not, of course, obviously we're actors and we know what we're going to be doing and what's going to happen. But it was, it was really, it was great the way the way they created this atmosphere where you really thought, it was really happening. And yeah, it took us 3 days to shoot that. And, a lot of the times the car wouldn't even be there and we would just be shooting. And so during that time, you didn't really feel like this was really happening. But when the car was driving by us and they were doing a master shot of everything going on, then you really felt like, wow, man, these guns are real, and we're really killing these people. You almost felt like that. It kind of reminded me of when the first movie I ever worked on was The Blue and the Gray with Gregory Peck and Stacy Keach in 1981. And I was going to school at the University of Arkansas and got to work on this for a few weeks. It's my first job ever. And so I got to be a Union soldier for a couple of weeks, and then I was a Confederate soldier for another week. But I was thinking that right there is the closest I'll ever get to being in the Civil War. But it felt like we really were there. And in a similar way, nobody is living that went through that death scene and everything. We don't know exactly what happened, but we're going by what people have said and everything. But just being there and going through all that, I feel like I kind of know what kind of happened, and that's all those guns. It was so loud. I had earplugs in, and I've been around guns and stuff. I've just grown up in Arkansas, but I hadn't been around any guns in a long time. And I forgot how loud they were. Of course, we had blanks, but they're all real guns. They had a real Tommy gun and a real BAR, and it was great. So it was fun. I think it came off pretty good. The special effects and all that.
Oh yeah.
They had. It looks pretty real. Now some of the glass, you see the glass flying and everything inside. That's CGI, but a lot of the other stuff is real. So yeah, they had the cinematographer, the stuntman. This whole crew. There was like 220 or 230 on the crew, and it's a pretty big crew. But everybody was just so professional, and all of them had just done so many other movies, and it was great. So I knew the film would look good when it came out. I was hoping it did.
Reading articles, and I saw that you're in an upcoming movie with Greg Kinnear and Morgan Freeman.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Brown Bank. I was so lucky to be in that. So, do you know much about the story, or do you know anything about it?
No, I don't.
Well, it's a true story about a guy that he was this high school football player back in 2002, just a great college, high school football player, and he had all these colleges looking at him like recruiters, and I think even professional teams were looking at him, and he was just really, really talented. I think high school All-American, and just the whole world ahead of him, and he had a great career in football ahead of him. Went to prison for rape for 5 years when he was 17, and then I think he served another 5 years in house arrest. And so after 10 years of this, the girl came forth and said she made it up. So the movie is about him back, and I play a college coach that gives him a chance to play football again. And of course, he's a lot older, and he does really well, but so many years have gone by, and just missed out on so much. But the story is about him trying to get his life back, and so I got to meet the real Brian Banks. He's just awesome guy. I loved hanging out with him. I got to didn't get to hang out with him too much on the set, but my wife and I went to the wrap party. This is where we shot it, and got to hang out with him and Greg Kinnear there. I didn't have any scenes with Kinnear, but got to hang out with him at the wrap party. But I do have scenes with Aldous Hodge. He's the lead actor in it, and I love this guy. He's just so gifted and so talented, and just loved working with him, and if he didn't mind running lines with me as much as I wanted to, or whatever I wanted to do, he was just great. And the director, Tom Shadyac, he did Bruce Almighty, Evan Almighty, The Nutty Professor. He's done a lot of comedies in the past, and of course this is a serious drama, but he was really good to work with too. Just amazing. The cool thing about that is, though, when I met him, I think it was the assistant director took me over to him and introduced me right when I got on the set, and I said, "Hey, I met you before," and he said, "Where?" I said, "Well, you gave me a call back in like 1993 or 4 or something. I can't remember what year it was."
Wow.
I had a call back with him for Liar Liar in L.A., and so I remembered him from that audition. And I know he's seen thousands and thousands of people send me. I don't think he remembered it, but he was really nice and was glad that it was funny. He said, "Well, that's great. So, well, I'm sorry you didn't get the role, but you got this one. And me and you are still in the business. That's a long time ago." And I said, "Yeah, it is. We're still hanging in here." So, and then I guess a few months after they completed shooting, I had to go back to Memphis and do some AR work. They added a line for me, and so I got to go back in the studio. He was in LA, but I could hear him over the audio. They had his audio pumped in, and I could hear him in the booth. And so I kind of got to work with him again, even though he was in LA. He was directing me for the ADR stuff, and they just needed me to say a couple more lines, even though when the camera, it's a scene of Aldous and I after a football game, and I'm basically telling him, he did a great job, and he's telling me, "Hey, Coach, thanks for giving me this opportunity." And so when the camera goes back to him, they wanted me to say a couple more lines off camera, and that they forgot to do that when we were shooting. So they came back a few months later and they added that, so that was cool. So I got some more lines, got to talk to Tom, the director, again. So yeah, they did it at a studio in Memphis, and he was at some studio in LA. And so, yeah, it was great. I'm excited for it to come out. It's August 9th, I think, is when it comes out. So,
excellent.
So the other actors that we've spoken to, our final question is usually, if they were to reboot Freddy's Nightmares, would you be on board with it?
Oh my gosh, yes, I'll be there tomorrow. Today. Yeah. What time do I be? Something to me? Yes. No, I would love it. Oh gosh, that would be a dream come true to work on that. Just that movie means so much to me because it was my first acting job, and it was my first kind of experience with, LA and stuff, and meeting Kyle, and because I've been dreaming of acting since I was 8 years old, and so I'll never forget that feeling when I stepped on that set and I thought to myself, wow, I'm not in McGee, Arkansas, where I grew up, a town of about 5,000 people, where about this. I'm actually on this set doing Freddy's Nightmares, and yeah, it was a great experience. I would love it.
Do you have any social media that you would like to put out there for people to follow you?
My website is it's just Dean Denton. I try to keep my work and stuff on there and information about me. It's got my bio, and there's a gallery section of all the people that I've worked with. And also, if there's any actors, young actors that hear this and they just, they want advice or they don't really know what to do and how to get started or whatever, just send me a message. There's a contact page on my website, and I love to help. I work with about 30 or 40 actors right now, and I don't charge a dime. I like to help other people, and I didn't have a whole lot of help when I was trying to get started, and so I had to figure a lot of this out by myself. So I've made a ton of mistakes, and I feel like I can save a lot of people from some of the mistakes that I made. And I just love helping people. There's there's I just get a lot of enjoyment out of that, and it's, you know, it's just a great thing. Try to help them. And so if anybody out there that hears this and they want some help, don't know what to do or whatever, just tell them to send me a message on my webpage, and I'll reach out to them and help them. Anyway, I've enjoyed talking to you guys.
Oh, you as well. Thank you so much.
It was great talking with you.
Thank you so much for listening. Please join us next week when we talk about Season 2, Episode 6, Lucky Stiff, in which Freddy gives us the winning lottery numbers.